Chapter 722. Just as the ship was getting further and further away, countless monkeys suddenly jumped out of the island. They appeared on the beach one by one. Some climbed up the reefs and stood up, letting out cries one after another. Xiaobai lay on the boat and listened with red eyes. In the end, he also called out. The boat moved towards the middle of the sea with the calls coming and going. When the sounds finally disappeared, Xiaobai also quieted down and quietly nestled in Jingyu's arms. Jingyu held a wooden comb and gently combed Xiaobai's hair. "Xiaobai, don't be sad," Jingyu said as she combed Xiaobai's hair. "One day, I will return. When that time comes, you will be able to use your own abilities to protect this island and your companions. No one will be able to bully you anymore." Xiaobai raised his head and looked at Jingyu. His pitch-black eyes sparkled as he nodded heavily at Jingyu. He opened his mouth and spat out 2 words under Jingyu's gaze. "Protect, protect." "Yes, protect." Jingyu's eyes were filled with joy. She helped Xiaobai tie up his hair. His clean and neat appearance and handsome face made Jingyu nod in satisfaction. They traveled for a day and a night. The next morning, they finally left the deserted sea area. The sharks were long gone, and Jingyu and Xiaochun, who didn't know how to sail, calmly let the boat drift with the wind. At noon the next day, the rain that had been holding back for a day and a night finally came down. The bean-sized raindrops hit the ship. Jingyu, Xiaochun, and the other 2 hid in the room and looked at the nonstop rain. They didn't know where the ship would drift to. Jingyu had nothing to do, so she found a few books to read in the room. Xiaochun was teaching Xiaobai swordsmanship. He even volunteered to teach Xiaobai how to speak. Jingyu was quite skeptical. With Xiaochun's taciturn manner, could he really teach Xiaobai? Forget it. Let him do what he wants. Fortunately, there was still something to eat on the boat. Unfortunately, Jingyu and Xiaochun didn't know how to cook, and Xiaobai didn't know how to either. Therefore, they could only roast a few sweet potatoes to eat and fill their stomachs. The rain outside was getting heavier and heavier. Jingyu didn't care. She was enjoying the scenery. Just as everyone was doing their own things, they suddenly heard a soft cry. "Help! Is there anyone? Help!" The soft cry was mixed in with the rain. If it weren't for Jingyu and Xiaochun's sensitive ears, they wouldn't have heard such a soft cry. Jingyu and Xiaochun listened attentively for more than 10 seconds. Only then did they confirm that someone was calling for help. Jingyu and Xiaochun stood up at the same time. They took a bamboo hat from the side and put it on their heads. They opened the door and walked to the deck. They saw the small boat floating in the wind and waves. There was a person sitting and a person lying on the boat. When he saw Xiaochun and Jingyu appear, he repeatedly shouted, "2 chivalrous warriors, please help us. We encountered a wave." The man cupped his hands and shouted to Jingyu and Xiaochun. Jingyu and Xiaochun looked at each other and hurriedly lowered the rope. After a few struggles, they finally got the 2 people on the boat. When they returned to the room, their bodies were soaked. Xiaobai stood at the door with a longbow in his hand. He looked at the man with a puzzled expression as he carried the 2 people in. Chapter 723. Put her on the bed. Jingyu tidied up the things and let the man put the woman on the bed. "Please help me. This is my wife. We met with a shipwreck in Zhonghai, and the ship was destroyed." The man looked to be around 30 years old, and the woman lying on the bed was young and beautiful. Looking at the man's body, he seemed to be a martial artist. "So that's how it is." Jingyu nodded slightly and said, "Big brother, please go outside and change your clothes. I will help your wife change into dry clothes." "Oh, thank you." The man's face was full of gratitude, and he walked out of the room. Jingyu helped the woman change her clothes and touched her forehead. She must have fainted because she was too tired. She didn't know if there was anything wrong with her. She wasn't a doctor. Jingyu helped the woman change her clothes and dried her hair. Then she walked out of the room and saw that the man had also changed into clean clothes. "Thank you, benefactors, for saving my life." When the man saw Jingyu walk out, he bowed deeply to Jingyu and Xiaochun and said, "I, Fong Ying, will repay your kindness with my life in the future. Big brother Fong, you are too serious. It was just a small matter." Jingyu looked at the man and had a good impression of him. She stepped forward and stood beside Xiaochun and said, "If it weren't for the 2 of you, my wife and I would have been buried in the sea." The man sighed deeply and said, "It was my fault for being impatient. I didn't expect the storm to be so heavy. If I had waited 2 days, it wouldn't have been like this." Why was Big Brother Fong in such a hurry to go out to sea? Jingyu asked Fong Ying to sit down and made him a cup of hot tea. "To tell you the truth, I am the person who escorted the goods. Today, I went to Yangzhou to deliver the goods. However, I was too impatient and didn't take into account the weather. I ran into a storm and lost the goods. I almost lost my life." Fong Ying shook his head helplessly. "Oh, I see." Jingyu nodded in realization. She finally understood that they were from the escort agency. There were escort agencies on the mainland, such as Nagato Escort Agency. Naturally, there were also escort agencies on the sea. Jingyu understood and nodded. "But why are the two of you here in Zhonghai?" Fong Ying took a sip of the hot tea and asked while looking at Jingyu and Xiao Chun. "Oh, we were going to Wu Fu Bay, but Lu Sheng didn't remember the way. The boatman committed suicide by jumping into the sea." Jingyu's expression didn't change at all. Xiao Chin's mouth twitched when he heard that. He lowered his head and didn't say anything. "The boatman jumped into the sea to commit suicide. How dare you say that?" This? Fong Ying was slightly taken aback when he heard Jingyu's words. He lowered his head awkwardly and murmured, "No wonder. If you don't mind, please let me take over the helm. I know the way back to Wu Fu Bay." Fong Ying smiled at Jingyu. Jingyu's eyes lit up when she heard Fong Ying's words. She was getting exactly what she wanted. If she lacked a boatman, she could pick one up along the way. Jingyu and Fong Ying were chatting happily when Xiaobai ran over and stood in front of Xiao Chun. He tugged on Xiao Chin's sleeve. The way he held the bow and arrow was very cute. Chapter 724. "And? You don't know?" Xiao Chin glanced at Xiaobai and asked coldly. Xiaobai blinked and nodded. When Xiao Chin saw Xiaobai nod, he slowly stood up and took the bow from Xiaobai's hand. He walked to the side and patiently demonstrated. "Do you understand now?" Xiao Chin asked. Xiaobai shook his head. Xiao Chin demonstrated again and asked, "Do you understand now?" This repeated again and again. Fong Ying stood on the side and watched in a daze. Jingyu helplessly held her forehead. How could he teach people like this? He didn't say a word and just did it. Haha. "Is this your child? He's really handsome." Fong Ying laughed loudly and looked at Jingyu with envy. This? Jingyu wanted to say that this wasn't their child, but Xiao Chun had already stood up and said, "Yes, his name is Xiaobai." What a good name. Fong Ying looked at the interaction between Xiao Chen and Xiaobai with envy. Neither of them said a word to each other, but for some reason, he felt that there was a strong sense of kinship between them. Jingyu couldn't stand it anymore. She rushed up and pulled Xiao Chun to the side. She squatted down and said carefully to Xiaobai. Xiaobai nodded and took the bow to the side to practice. Jingyu stood up straight and stared at Xiao Chun. "Do you not know how to speak with that mouth of yours? It's like you're going to die if you say another word." Xiao Chin's face darkened slightly. "Ahem. I'm going inside to check on my wife," Fong Ying said tactfully, then turned around and went into the house. Xiao Chen watched Fong Ying leave and immediately hugged Jingyu's waist. Jingyu blushed and gritted her teeth at Xiao Chun, who didn't forget to take advantage of her. She couldn't push him away, so she could only let Xiao Chen hug her and sit on a chair. "Xiao Chun, I think it's not safe to bring them along." Jingyu sat in Xiao Chen's arms and frowned slightly. "Wanted posters are everywhere, this." "Don't worry," Xiao Chen hugged Jingyu and said, "He recognized us a long time ago." "Recognized?" Jingyu was shocked and stared at Xiao Chun with wide eyes. "Nothing." Xiao Chen narrowed his eyes and said, "A traveling escort agency is most concerned about such things. How could he not recognize us? However, since he chose not to point it out, he's naturally prepared to play dumb until the end. We don't have to worry." "That's true." Jingyu raised her head and glanced at the room. "So what if he knows?" Xiao Chen played with Jingyu's slender fingers and pursed his lips slightly. "A small escort agency is nothing to me." Jingyu's face darkened when she heard this. She raised her hand and poked Xiao Chen's cheek without saying anything. Xiao Chen rubbed Jingyu's hand as the two sat in the room and chatted. Xiao Chun was really smart. He could shoot the arrow steadily, but he still didn't have enough strength. Therefore, if he couldn't shoot far enough, he could get better with more practice. The heavy rain lasted for the entire afternoon. It only stopped when the sky was dark. Jingyu and Xiao Chun walked out of the cabin and smelled the refreshing scent of the rainwater. From the looks of it, how long will it take for us to reach Wufu Bay? Jingyu raised her head slightly and looked at the sea as she asked. We'll probably reach tomorrow morning. Fang Ying also walked out and looked around to familiarize herself with the ship. She raised the sails while answering Jingyu's question. Chapter 725. It's not safe to sail at night. Big Brother Fang, there's no need to rush. It's good to be a little slower. We just need to arrive before noon. Jingyu nodded slightly. She looked up at Fang Ying and said with a smile. Fang Ying nodded in response. When the sky was completely dark, Fang Ying's wife finally woke up. Jingyu had to admit that this woman was indeed a very gentle woman. Perhaps it was because her body was weak. She only woke up for a short while and went back to sleep after eating some porridge. Tonight, Jingyu and Xiao Qin finally had a comfortable meal. Obviously, it wasn't made by the two of them, but by Fang Ying. She was so good at cooking that Jingyu was filled with envy and jealousy. She eagerly followed behind Fang Ying to help wash the vegetables and so on. Our extremely possessive male lead was instantly unhappy. He stood at the door and watched the two of them talking and laughing. He secretly made up his mind that he would work hard on his culinary skills when he got back. After eating and drinking to their fill, everyone went asleep. Fortunately, it didn't continue to rain that night. It seemed that tomorrow's weather would be good. Jingyu and Xiao Chun slept until late in the morning when Xiaobai woke them up. Xiaobai, stop messing around. Jingyu and Xiao Chun slowly opened their eyes and looked at Xiaobai, who had jumped onto their bed. They frowned helplessly. Xiao Chen's face was so gloomy that he wanted to kill someone. He stared coldly at Xiaobai, causing the little guy to tremble in fear. Then, he neatly threw himself into Jingyu's arms and didn't look at Xiao Chen anymore. Really? Jingyu raised her hand and rubbed Xiaobai's head. She reluctantly got up. Xiao Chen also slowly got up. They hadn't eaten enough meat yesterday, and today, someone had ruined it. Because of the arrival of Fang Ying and his wife, Xiaobai slept in Jingyu and Xiao Chen's room. The two of them slept in each other's arms for the entire night. Because of this, Xiao Chun was gloomy the entire night. In the morning, he was woken up by this little guy. How could the Ninth Emperors not give him any face? When Jingyu and Xiao Chun left the room, they saw Fang Ying supporting his wife, Shun bailing, and playing on the deck. Benefactors, you're up? Fang Ying and Shun bailing turned around and bowed slightly to Jingyu and Xiao Chun. We've made a fool of ourselves. Jingyu politely returned the greeting. She looked at the endless blue sky and the rising sun. It was indeed a good day. We'll reach Wufu Bay in a little more than 2 hours. Fang Ying said to Jingyu and Xiao Chun, do you have any plans? If you're not in a hurry, why don't you come to my residence and have some hot tea? It won't be too late to leave after resting for a while. Jingyu turned her head slightly to look at Xiao Chun. Since Escort Chief Fang is so kind, we won't refuse. Xiao Chen's expression didn't change as he calmly replied. Ha ha ha, that's great. Fang Ying replied. I'll sail the ship to the escort agency's dock. It'll be closer to the residence. I'll leave it to you, Big Brother Fang. Jingyu replied with a slight smile. Fang Ying was right. In less than 2 hours, Jingyu and Xiao Chun could already see more and more ships coming and going from the ship. Jingyu and Xiao Chun returned to their room and changed their clothes. Xiao Chun put on a mask while Jingyu put on a veil. When the ship docked, Jingyu and Xiao Chun walked out. Fang Ying didn't say anything when he saw their appearances. He just smiled and led the way. Most of the escort agency's docks were docked with cargo ships. When Jingyu and Xiao Chun arrived, they saw all kinds of ships unloading and loading cargo. Chapter 726. Big Brother Fang, we don't want this boat anymore. Since Big Brother Fang is familiar with this place, please help us sell it. Jingyu walked down the boat and held Xiaobai's hand. She looked up at the boat behind her and turned to Fang Ying. Haha, that's easy. I'll get someone to sell it. Fang Ying nodded in agreement. He looked around and raised his hand to shout something. Then, he saw a skinny man running over. Oh, isn't this escort leader Fang? Why did you call me? The skinny man had a shifty look. His triangular eyes shone brightly as he looked at Jing Yu and Xiao Chun. He smiled and asked Fang Ying, "These two guests want to sell this boat?" Fang Ying pointed at the boat behind him and said, "Make sure you sell it cleanly. I'll give you 20% of the money." Deal. The man looked at the boat behind him and said to Fang Ying with a smile, "Escort leader Fang, Wufu Bay hasn't been peaceful recently. Someone powerful has come. You should be careful." The man looked at Jing Yu and Xiao Chun meaningfully. "What's there to be afraid of? Who dares to touch my benefactor in Wufu Bay?" Fang Ying did not seem to care as she shouted angrily. Her voice was so loud that it did not seem to be for the man to hear, but for other people to hear. For example, the few people who had walked away after Fang Ying finished speaking. Yes, yes, yes. So it's escort leader Fang's benefactor. My apologies. The skinny man was slightly taken aback. He nodded and bowed, which made Jing Yu's eyes twitch. "All right, when you're done, come find me at Liuha Escort Agency," Fang Ying said and continued walking with Jing Yu, Xiao Qian, and the others. Fang Ying's mansion was just beside the Liuha Escort Agency. It was a simple but exquisite courtyard. The news of Fang Ying's ship being wrecked at sea had spread. Now that the two of them had returned safely, the servants of the Fang residence were overjoyed. Jing Yu and Xiao Qian sat for a short while and understood the origin of the 5 prefectures bay. The 5 residences bay got its name from the 5 residences within the bay, and one of them was the Fang residence of the Fang clan. The 5 residences were scattered across the bay, and a long time ago, these 5 residences dominated this part of the sea, and almost no one dared to disturb them. However, the balance of power between the 5 prefectures was broken in the end. Because of women, because of wealth, because of the invasion of foreign enemies, 2 of the 5 prefectures were massacred. In the end, the remaining 3 prefectures finally joined forces to resist the invaders and successfully held onto their own bloodline. It was said that the battle that year had always been a pain in the hearts of the 3 prefectures. The 3 middle prefectures of the 5 prefectures bay continued to fight against each other, but once the invaders arrived, the 3 prefectures would definitely join forces to fight against the invaders. Jing Yu sighed as she listened to the past of the 5 prefectures bay. Indeed, there was strength in numbers. "My 2 benefactors, please rest in this residence for a while. I still have some matters to attend to in the escort agency, so I'll make a trip there first," Fang Ying said to Jing Yu and Xiao Chun. After instructing the guards to serve them well, he left in a hurry. Jing Yu sat in her seat and frowned slightly. She had heard the skinny man's words just now. Jing Yu had heard Jing Yu. He said that there was a powerful person in the 5 prefectures bay. Chapter 727. Could it be that Nailin Yu and the others had caught up? Jing Yu and Xiao Chun were very confused. Shen Bailing warmly welcomed Jing Yu and Xiao Chun. Xiao Chun stayed for a while before standing up and saying, "I need to go out." Jing Yu looked at Xiao Chun in confusion before slowly nodding her head. "Go ahead." Jing Yu knew what Xiao Chun wanted to do. Were the people from the Nether sect here? Xiao Chun left the Fang mansion while Jing Yu brought Xiao Bai around the Fang mansion. The Fang mansion was very boring. Shen Bailing accompanied Jing Yu for a while and felt that her body wasn't feeling well. Naturally, Jing Yu didn't let Shen Bailing accompany her any longer and told her to rest. In the courtyard of the Fang mansion, Jing Yu sat in the courtyard and looked at the wooden planks on the pavilion with boredom. She counted how many planks there were. Xiao Bai was running around the courtyard and jumping around before sitting down quietly beside Jing Yu. Sigh. It's so boring. Jing Yu rubbed Xiao Bai's head in boredom. Xiao Bai rubbed against Jing Yu's hand and leaned against Jing Yu without saying anything. Jing Yu stretched and her heart skipped a beat. She looked down at Xiao Bai and said, "How about I take you out to play?" Jing Yu said as she touched her belt. Fortunately, she still had some money. Immerse. Xiao Bai's eyes lit up with joy when he heard this. He blinked his shining eyes and looked at Jing Yu as he nodded vigorously. Let's go, let's go." Jing Yu immediately stood up happily. She tidied herself up a little and put on her veil. Then, she held Xiao Bai's hand and swaggered onto the street. The streets of 5 Prefectures Bay could be said to be very lively. Since it was a bay area, there was naturally a lot of seafood. There were also quite a lot of carts coming and going. Jingyu was very impressed by these little things. Many of the dishes that she had never seen before directly attracted the gluttonous worm in Jingyu's stomach. As soon as Jingyu and Xiaobai entered the street, they began to sweep through the streets. Xiaobai was very curious about this pair. The two walked and stopped to talk and laugh. When the passers-by saw this, they all thought that this was a mother and son pair. Xiao was born handsome, and his pair of blinking black eyes made people's hearts beat faster. Along the way, they attracted quite a lot of attention. The two ate and played along the way. Finally, they were tired and found a tea house to sit down. In the tea house, the storyteller was talking nonsense. Jingyu was eating melon seeds and listening with interest. Just as the story ended, the storyteller took a sip of tea and began to talk again. Speaking of which, the most popular thing now is the 9th Emperor's and his imperial concubine with different pupils. The storyteller had a small mustache. As soon as he finished speaking, he immediately attracted the attention of everyone present. Each and every one of them looked at the storyteller curiously. The 9th Emperor's is an extraordinary person in our Tokyo. But who would have thought that the 9th Emperor's brought back a woman who can tame wolves? We thought that she was just an ordinary woman, but who would have thought that this woman's identity is even more extraordinary? What's so great about it? Someone below asked. The storyteller's eyes lit up when he heard that. This woman is not some wild child. She is but she's the eldest legitimate granddaughter of the Prime Minister's manor. Speaking of this, we have to talk about the first master of the Prime Minister's manor. The storyteller exaggerated all kinds of things with eloquence. Jingyu sat on the seat and slightly lowered her eyes. Chapter 728. Following this, Jingyu turned her head and gazed out of the window into the distance. She was lost in her thoughts. Xiaobai sat beside Jingyu and listened to the storyteller's words. He was lost in thought, and his small eyes didn't even blink. The story of the 9th Emperor's and the woman with different pupils had long been known by everyone. The versions that were passed around were all different. The people who were listening had already heard of it, but they were still interested and happily listened. From time to time, someone would throw the silver pieces in their hands into a jar on the table they were sitting on. Every once in a while, someone would come up and collect the silver pieces. This is incredible. That mysterious hidden clan actually said that the 9th imperial concubine has different pupils. Do you guys know what different pupils are? When the storyteller said that he was nervous, everyone present widened their eyes and looked at the storyteller nervously. Those are different pupils. They're like monsters and their eyes can change color. The people below all widened their eyes and their eyes were filled with shock. Jingyu's lips curled up in a mocking smile. She propped her chin up and didn't show any expression. However, Xiaobai, who was beside her, suddenly reached out and grabbed Jingyu's arm. His small face was filled with seriousness. Jingyu was startled by this little fellow's actions and looked at him in confusion. Let's go. Xiaobai stared at Jingyu for a long time and moved his mouth as he spoke. Silly boy, what are you afraid of? Jingyu's eyes revealed a faint smile. She understood Xiaobai's meaning. This fellow had heard the storyteller talk about how the people with different pupils were chased away and how they were hunted down. His eyes were filled with anxiety as he looked at Jingyu. Xiaobai blinked and looked at Jingyu. Jingyu arched her eyebrows and smiled, but she didn't say anything. The storyteller wantonly talked about how powerful the people with different pupils were and how they harmed people. It was said that they killed people in so-and-so places and wolves were wreaking havoc in so-and-so places. Some of the men who were listening below were furious, and they shouted that they had to destroy the other pupil, or else they wouldn't be at ease. Xiaobai's pitch-black eyes were filled with anger. Jingyu raised her hand and pressed on Xiaobai's head. Her expression was indifferent. Xiaobai blinked his eyes and looked at Jingyu. He raised his head slightly and finally lowered it unwillingly. Oh, Hugh. Xiaobai raised his head and looked at Jingyu. Suddenly, he lay down on Jingyu's lap and looked up at Jingyu. There was a faint light in his eyes as he said, like. Jingyu's heart trembled violently. She looked into Xiaobai's pure eyes, and a part of her heart suddenly softened. She raised her hand and placed it on Xiaobai's back. The corner of her mouth curled up as she said, I also like Xiaobai a lot. Oh, Xiaobai grinned. He buried his head in Jingyu's lap and rubbed against it. Just as Jingyu and Xiaobai were having fun, Jingyu suddenly felt that the noisy tea house had quieted down. Jingyu raised her head in confusion and looked around. Finally, her gaze landed on the entrance of the tea house. Ignorant storyteller, go, cut off his tongue for this young master. The man who stepped forward was dressed in black and stood there quietly. His black hair was draped over his shoulders, and his eyes were extremely seductive. His words were clearly cold, but when they came out of his mouth, there was an inexplicable charm to them. Chapter 729. When Jingyu's gaze landed on the devastatingly beautiful face, she was instantly dumbfounded. Fuck, isn't this Hellion Theo? Why is he here? Jingyu stared blankly at Hellion Theo, who was standing at the entrance of the tea house. He was still as devilishly handsome and dressed in black. For a moment, Jingyu thought that Hellion Theo was dressed in red.
Yes.
The two people behind Hellion Theo had cold expressions on their faces as they stepped forward and captured the storyteller. The surrounding people all widened their eyes in horror. The storyteller was shocked by Hellion Theo's stance and looked at Hellion Theo in horror. You? How can you be so unreasonable? You want to reason with this young master? Hellion Theo stared coldly at the storyteller as his lips curled into an indifferent smile. The moment Hellion Theo smiled, all the women in the tea house paled in comparison. There were even some men who looked at Hellion Theo with infatuation. When Jingyu saw this scene, she immediately spat out a mouthful of blood in her heart and cursed, "What a devil! Since you want a reason, this young master will explain it to you properly," Hellion Theo said as he calmly sat down on a chair. He squinted his peach blossom eyes and asked the storyteller, "This young master wants to ask you, have you seen the 9th Emperors and his imperial concubine with different pupils? Have you personally experienced all the things that you just described? What evidence do you have to prove that the 9th imperial concubine killed people and commanded wolves? Don't worry, if you can answer me, this young master won't cut off your tongue today. If your answer is wrong, not only will this young master want your tongue, this young master will also want your head." As soon as Hellion Theo finished speaking, the entire room fell into silence. The storyteller's face instantly turned pale. He felt that he had been wronged. Who would reason with a storyteller like this? Which one of these storytellers didn't spout nonsense like a torrent? How could he be so calculative about the contents of the book? This made the storyteller complain incessantly. He wanted to cry out for injustice, but he didn't know where to start. Everyone's expression was also very strange. What's wrong? Why aren't you saying anything? Hellion Theo looked at the storyteller with his chin in his hand and said with a mocking gaze, "Aren't you very talkative? Why aren't you saying anything now? My lord, this lowly one knows his mistake." The storyteller looked at Hellion Theo and said Hellion Theos, "Lord, please, tell me what you want me to say. I will say it. My lord, please spare me. This lowly one relies on his tongue. Heh." Hellion Theo smiled disdainfully, stood up, and said coldly, "Cut off his tongue? No, my lord. Hellion Theo turned around to leave without hesitation. The storyteller's eyes were suddenly filled with horror, and he struggled desperately. The people around them all looked terrified and turned their heads away, not daring to look. However, no one dared to step forward. Hee. The most uncontrollable thing in this world is other people's mouths. Just as the storyteller's mouth was pried open, a faint voice suddenly sounded from the crowd, attracting everyone's attention. Hellion Theo frowned when he heard this. As if unhappy with being disturbed, the crowd slowly opened up a path. The woman in black and purple clothes slowly stood up. Her black hair was casually tied up and she wore a black veil on her face, revealing a pair of dark eyes that looked indifferently at Hellion Theo. Chapter 730. Even if you can kill one person, you won't be able to shut everyone's mouths. Why bother? Jingyu's eyes curved slightly as she walked towards Hellion Theo. Xiaobai stood beside Jingyu and blinked as he looked at Hellion Theo. The instant Hellion Xiao turned his head to look, he was instantly stunned. That petite figure stood in the middle of the crowd. That pair of black eyes still had the same expression. In that instant, it was as if he saw a girl smiling at him like a flower, so moving that it tugged at his heartstrings. That's true. After being stunned for a moment, just when everyone thought that something was going to happen to the woman, Hellion Theo suddenly spoke up. Tell him to scram. Hellion Xiao's gaze shifted away from Jingyu. He narrowed his eyes and glanced at the storyteller whose face was pale from fright. He said, I'll spare your life today. Remember, you can eat whatever you want, but you can't speak whatever you want. If there's a next time, I won't show mercy. Thank you, my lord. The storyteller was trembling all over. He frantically kowtowed to Hellion Xiao and then to Jingyu. Then, he ran away in a panic without knowing where he was going. Jingyu calmly raised her eyebrows and looked Hellion Theo up and down. Why aren't you wearing red clothes? Jingyu blinked as she looked at Hellion Theo. Hellion Theo's face darkened when he heard this. Jingyu had asked him the same question before, and now she was asking him the same question again. Because I'm ugly. Hellion Theo stared at Jingyu and replied, You have to believe me. With your face, you'll look good in anything. Jingyu looked at Hellion Theo with a serious expression. Are you praising me? The corners of Hellion Xiao's mouth curled up as he looked at Jingyu in a joyful mood. No. Jingyu's face darkened. She glared at Hellion Theo and said, Can't you tell that I'm jealous? Hellion Theo's face darkened again. Get out of the way. If there's nothing else, I'm going back. Jingyu glared at Hellion Theo and spoke rudely. The guards behind Hellion Theo were completely dumbfounded by the situation in front of them. This woman who came out of nowhere not only criticized their master's clothes, but also spoke so rudely. What was strange was that their master's strange, with his strange temper to get angry. This was too scary. Where am I going to find you? When Hellion Theo heard Jingyu's words, his expression froze. He glanced at Xiaobai, who was standing beside Jingyu, and a strange expression flashed across his face. Liuhe Escort Agency, Fong Residence. Jingyu glanced at Hellion Theo, took Xiaobai's hand, and walked around Hellion Theo. Under the strange gazes of so many people, they walked out of the tea house. The surrounding onlookers stared blankly with their eyes wide open. They had no idea what was going on. Hellion Theo looked at Jingyu's departing figure and narrowed his eyes slightly. Then, he smiled faintly and said, Muyu was right. Come out more often, and you'll always find some unexpected surprises. What? The guard standing beside Hellion Theo was slightly stunned. He looked at Hellion Theo and asked, Nothing. Let's go back to the inn. Hellion Theo narrowed his eyes and said, Prepare a generous gift tomorrow. I heard that Chief Fongying is back. We should pay him a visit. Yes. The guard bowed in response. He was completely confused by his master's actions. Chapter 731. When Jingyu returned to the Fong residence, Shun Bailing and Fong Ying were in the residence. When they heard that Jingyu had gone out by herself, they were a little worried. Now that they saw that Jingyu had returned safely, they heaved a sigh of relief. In the blink of an eye, the sky had turned dark. Xiao Chun, who had gone out, had also returned. This was not much different from when he went out. After Xiao Chun came back, he did not say what he was going to do. Jingyu was too lazy to ask. She washed up and went to bed. After a good night's sleep, Jingyu was still asleep when she was woken up by the clamor outside. What's going on outside? Jingyu put on her clothes and opened the door. A servant girl standing by the door bowed slightly to Jingyu and said, Young Master Hellion has come to the Fong residence. Master and Madam are receiving him in the front hall. We apologize for disturbing the two guests. It's fine. Jingyu waved her hand slightly, but she was speechless. Young Master Hellion? She did not need to use her brain to know that it must be Hellion Theo, that fool. Xiao Chen also walked to Jingyu's side. When he heard the servant girl's words, he raised his eyebrows slightly and looked at Jingyu. Let's go and take a look, Jingyu said, then turned back to her room to freshen up before heading to the main hall. Before she entered the hall, she heard the voices inside. There was a group of people standing at the door. Jingyu was quite familiar. Weren't they the people Helly and Theo had brought over yesterday? As for the conversation in the room, haha, I've long heard that Escort Fong's wife is the #1 beauty in 5 Residence Bay. Seeing you today, you are indeed beautiful. Jingyu, who was standing at the door, was in a mess the moment he said those words, which were full of teasing and lust. There was a moment of strange silence in the hall. Jingyu and Xiao Chen walked in. Jingyu looked up and saw the man in red sitting in the guest seat. He had a big red flower on his head. Jingyu would recognize him even if he turned into ashes. In today's world, there was someone with such a style. Who else could it be but Mu Yu? Young Prince Mu? Tell me, who else could it be? Jingyu looked at Mu Yu, who was sitting next to Helly and Theo, with a black face. His flowery clothes, the big red flower on his head, and the way Mu Yu stared at Shin Bailing, unable to take his eyes off her. Jingyu could almost imagine what would happen if Fong had a knife in her hand. She would definitely hack this person to death in a matter of minutes. Brother Fong. Jingyu took a deep breath and walked over, breaking the strange silence in the room. Our 2 benefactors are here. When Fong saw Jingyu and Xiao Chun, the gloomy expression on her face faded a little. She stood up and greeted them with a smile. Jingyu smiled. She felt deeply helpless when she saw Fong shielding Shun Bailing behind her. She turned to look at Helly and Theo and Mu Yu. She couldn't understand why Helly and Theo would bring this guy out with him. Miss Jingyu, long time no see. Greetings. Mu Yu's eyes lit up when he saw Jingyu walk in. He was really glowing. He looked at Jingyu excitedly and bowed politely to her. Before Jingyu could say anything, he immediately said, Miss Jingyu, this king really had a hard time looking for you. How come you're not in the northern pastoral anymore in the blink of an eye? This king has already prepared a generous gift and is ready to officially marry you. Mu Yu said with deep affection. Jingyu's face instantly darkened. Chapter 732. Xiao Chun, who was standing behind Jingyu, had a completely gloomy look in his eyes. He raised his hand and pulled Jingyu into his embrace. His gloomy face was filled with murderous intent as he stared at Mu Yu and said, Young Prince Mu, do you not want to keep your mouth and eyes anymore? Mu Yu's words instantly stopped as he stared blankly at Xiao Chun. He didn't have the guts to spit out the words he had been holding in. He looked at Xiao Chun and smiled embarrassedly as he cursed in his heart. Wasn't it just something that could be used against him? If Xiao Chun revealed that he had erectile dysfunction, then he would lose all his face. Mu Yu laughed as he thought about it. He looked at Xiao Chun happily and said, Ninth Master Xiao, ha ha ha, long time no see. Ha ha ha, you finally won the heart of a beauty. Congratulations, congratulations. Ha. Jingyu and Xiao Chun looked at Mu Yu as if they were looking at an idiot. Their faces darkened slightly. Fong Ying's mouth also twitched. She really couldn't understand where this person came from. Long time no see, Ninth Master Xiao, Helly and Theo said indifferently as he raised his chin and looked at Xiao Chun with narrowed eyes. Xiao Chun looked coldly at Helly and Theo and didn't say anything. The 2 of them looked at each other in silence. Jingyu, who was in Xiao Chun's embrace, felt the temperature drop inch by inch and trembled violently. Why did the 2 of them become so cold when they collided? Why did you come here? Jingyu couldn't stand it anymore. She looked up at Helly and Theo and broke the strange atmosphere. I came here for you. When Helly and Theo heard Jingyu's words, he turned his gaze to Jingyu. His originally aggressive gaze was instantly retracted when he looked at Jingyu. Looking at the gentle expression on his face, the difference was too big. Listen to the words he just said. I came here for you. TSK, TSK, TSK. Our 9th Emperor's exploded in an instant. His gloomy gaze looked as if he wanted to rush up and tear Helly and Theo's mouth apart. Your northern pastoral finally made a move? Jingyu's words made her feel a strong sense of danger. She narrowed her eyes and looked at Helly and Theo with a dangerous gaze. A little. Jingyu's eyes. Yes. Helly and Xiao nodded slightly. What are you guys talking about? Mu Yu stood at the side and listened for a long time, but he didn't understand what they were talking about. He looked at Helly and Theo in confusion, then looked at Jingyu and asked. Jingyu's heart skipped a beat. She looked at Muyu and said with a strange expression, "Don't tell me that he is the leader of your northern pastoral group this time." Jingyu looked at Muyu strangely as she spoke, causing Muyu's hair to stand on end. His heart trembled slightly. Could it be that Miss Jingyu has taken a liking to me? Is she trying to flirt with me with her eyes? At this thought, Muyu's face turned red with excitement. He looked at Jingyu excitedly and blinked his eyes.
Yes.
When Hellion Theo heard Jingyu's question, his expression became strange. He gritted his teeth and spat out this word. In that instant, Jingyu felt as if there were 10,000 words galloping in her heart. She turned to look at Muyu, who was blinking his eyes like he was having a stroke. Her expression was so dark that she wanted to kill someone. Don't you think it's too boring? Jingyu looked at Muyu strangely and asked hesitantly, "Don't you know who the person with different pupils is?" "I know." When Muyu heard Jingyu's question, he raised his head and replied loudly, "Isn't it the Tokyo's 9th Imperial Concubine? I heard that she's also called Jingyu. She has the same name as you. Ha ha ha." Chapter 734. Muyu said smoothly as he laughed loudly and pointed at Jingyu. After he finished speaking, he suddenly saw Xiao Chen, who was sitting silently at the side. His smile froze as he looked at Xiao Chen and then at Jingyu. Then the expression on her face changed rapidly. She opened her mouth wide and pointed at Jingyu and Xiao Chen in disbelief. Then she jumped up from her seat and jumped and spun around with her head in her hands as if she had gone crazy. Jingyu stared dumbfoundedly at Muyu's series of changes. There was only one thought in her mind. It's over. This little prince has probably gone crazy from the shock. You're the 9th emperors of the Tokyo. Muyu took a deep breath as he pointed at Xiao Chen. After that, he pointed at Jingyu and said, You're the 9th imperial concubine of the Tokyo? Jingyu? Don't we look alike? Jingyu calmly raised her brows as she looked at Muyu. Clang. Muyu sat down on the floor and looked at Jingyu in a daze. Then he looked at Xiao Chen and finally at Hellion Theo. Hellion Theo calmly glanced at Muyu before he picked up his teacup and took a sip. His expression instantly made Muyu explode. Hellion Theo, do you know that they are the 9th emperors of the Tokyo and the 9th imperial concubine? Muyu instantly jumped up and glared at Hellion Theo. Don't you know it yourself? Hellion Theo ignored Muyu's outburst and said faintly, How would I know? Muyu opened his mouth to deny it. However, after he finished speaking, he suddenly realized that he really did know. He had just called them 9th Master Xiao and Jingyu. But he didn't freaking think of this. Jingyu looked at Muyu's expression and laughed in her heart. This was the first time she had seen someone with such a long reaction time. Muyu was quite conflicted as he walked around in a circle. Then, he deeply frowned and muttered to himself, Why didn't I think of it? 9th Master Xiao is the 9th Emperor's, and the 9th Emperor's sweetheart is Jingyu. Muyu turned around again and said, Tokyo is the 9th Emperor's and the 9th Imperial concubine with different pupils. This person can't have really gone crazy, right? Jingyu looked at Muyu and asked Xiao Chen with the corner of her mouth twitching. Xiao Chen was silent the entire time. He stared at Muyu with eyes full of killing intent. All right, this guy's vinegar jar hadn't been picked up yet. Wait, since you are the 9th Imperial concubine, what about the other pupils? Muyu paused and looked at Jingyu curiously. I don't see anything different about you. Muyu looked at Jingyu curiously. Jingyu's pair of black eyes instantly turned golden when Muyu finished speaking. Now, do you see it? Jingyu looked at Muyu calmly. Muyu looked at Jingyu's pair of golden eyes, dumbfounded. Jingyu looked at Muyu's dazed appearance, and the corner of her mouth curled up in a mocking smile. This person is probably going to call out to catch a monster in the next second, right? Beautiful, truly beautiful. Just as Jingyu had this thought, she saw Muyu walk towards Jingyu in a daze. His eyes were filled with amazement as he looked at Jingyu's eyes and said, There are actually such beautiful eyes in this world. Jingyu looked at Muyu as if she had seen a ghost. Her face was filled with a strange expression. Chapter 735. Miss Jingyu. This king has decided. Just as Jingyu had yet to recover from Muyu's strange reaction, Muyu's sudden shout attracted the attention of Xiao Qian and Helian Theo. They looked at Muyu in confusion, not knowing what was going on. From today onwards, I will protect you. Muyu looked at Jingyu seriously and said, These people are blind. They don't know how to appreciate such beautiful eyes, and they even want to kill a little girl. This is too much. Jingyu looked at Muyu in a daze. When she heard his righteous words, the corners of her mouth twitched slightly. You speak as if you don't want to do that. Sigh. What a pity. Miss Jingyu, why did you marry the 9th emperors? Muyu looked at Jingyu with grief and indignation. If you marry me, I will definitely keep you by my side and admire you. You are really too beautiful. Admire your grandpa. Xiao Qian looked at Muyu with a gloomy face. His murderous aura was rising inch by inch, and Jingyu was very suspicious. Would Xiao Qian suddenly rush up and chop Muyu to death? Don't tell me. Aren't you afraid? Jingyu's golden eyes flickered slightly. She looked at Muyu curiously and said, They said that I am a monster. What are you afraid of? Muyu looked at Jingyu with a drooling face and said, If I can marry a wife with different pupils, I will be the envy of the world. Jingyu's mouth twitched violently. She looked at Muyu's glowing eyes and his drooling face, which made Jingyu shrink back slightly. This guy really didn't take his medicine. Not only was his behavior different from others, but his thoughts were also very strange. Bang! Just as Jingyu was cursing in her heart, the teacup in Xiao Qian's hand suddenly shattered. Jingyu and Helian Theo looked on in horror as Xiao Qian viciously punched Muyu in the stomach at the fastest speed possible. Ouch! Bang! In a short 3 seconds, Muyu, who was standing in front of Jingyu, was knocked to the ground by Xiao Qian's punch. He held his stomach and curled up on the ground like a roasted lobster. He couldn't even cry out in pain. Do you feel better now? Xiao Qian coldly rotated his wrist. His pair of cold eyes stared at Muyu, who was lying at his feet. The coldness in his eyes didn't recede in the slightest. Cough. Helian Theo finally came back to his senses. He calmly stood up and looked at Xiao Qian as he said, I haven't seen the 9 emperors in action for a long time. I didn't expect them to be so ruthless. When Xiao Qian heard Helian Theo's words, he slightly tilted his head and looked at Helian Theo. He didn't even bother to say anything. He turned around and walked towards Jingyu. He stretched out his hand towards Jingyu and said, We'll leave in the afternoon for the Roman forest. Xing Er sent news that Shangguan Linglan and him are about to reach the forest. Lan Lan sent news? Jingyu's eyes lit up when she heard this. Yes. Xiao Qian nodded in response. Then you guys. Jingyu turned her head to look at Helian Theo and Muyu. Xiao Qian indifferently glanced at Helian Theo and said, Why care about them? After speaking, he pulled Jingyu away, leaving Helian Theo standing there. He raised his eyebrows slightly and didn't say anything. He lowered his head and looked at Muyu, who was lying on the ground pretending to be dead. His face turned cold. He gave him a disdainful kick and said, Stop pretending. No one cares about you. Chapter 736. Sob sob sob. Miss Jingyu is too cruel. Muyu raised her head with tears in her eyes. Helian Xiu's face darkened even more when he saw her look as if she was about to die. Why did Miss Jingyu get married? It wasn't easy for me to fall in love with a girl. Sigh. Muyu sighed bitterly. He slowly got up and looked at Helian Theo. When he saw Helian Theo's beautiful face, his expression changed again. Heliana, look at us. I'm not married and you're not married. Why don't we make do and I marry you? Muyu looked at Helian Theo with a flattering expression. When he said this, he rubbed his hands and looked at Helian Theo with a grin. Helian Theo turned to look at Muyu. His beautiful peach blossom eyes slowly narrowed as he stared at Muyu. Muyu also looked at Helian Theo. Then, in the next second, ouch, bang. Helian Theo kicked Muyu in the stomach without hesitation. Muyu's red figure flew out in an instant and smashed into the table and chair. After that, Helly and Theo turned and left without looking at Muyu. Still want to marry? Young Prince Mu? Helly and Theo's faint voice sounded. Muyu clutched his stomach and rolled on the ground like a dead dog. Ouch. Helly and Theo. You really did it. Ouch. It hurts. Muyu coughed and rubbed his stomach. Helly and Theo's kick was real. Unlike Xiao Qin's earlier mercy, this kick made Muyu groan. Humph. Helly and Theo coldly pursed his lips and walked toward the door without saying another word. Xiao Chun and Jingyu said that they were going to leave, so naturally, they didn't have time to stay. After they left the front hall, they went back to their room to pack their things. Xiaobai stood in the courtyard and practiced archery. His small body warmed Jingyu's heart. Xiao Chun. Jingyu raised her voice and called out to Xiao Chun. She frowned at Xiaobai and said worriedly, Xiaobai can't come with us. Why don't we leave him at Fong Manor and let Brother Fong take care of him? I've asked, and sister-in-law Shin's health isn't good. The two of them haven't been able to have a child. And Xiao Chun narrowed his eyes and looked at Xiaobai's small body. He said, being able to stay in Fong Manor can be considered as being able to protect him. Fong Ying's people are trustworthy. Then, let's go talk to Brother Fong? Jingyu was very reluctant, but this was the only thing she could do. Let's go. Xiao Qian and Jingyu really did go to the front courtyard. In the courtyard, Fong Ying was making tea and talking. His harmonious appearance made Jingyu and Xiao Qian's hearts tremble. If they could be like this many years later, they would definitely be very happy. Why have our two benefactors come? When Fong Ying and Shin Bailing saw Jingyu and Xiao Chun, they both stood up and nodded at Jingyu and Xiao Chun. Brother Fong, we're here to say goodbye. Jingyu nodded at Fong Ying and Shen Bailing and said, we've troubled you for many days. Thank you for your help. Right now, we have more important things to do. So we've come to say goodbye to brother and sister-in-law. You're leaving just like that? When Shen Bailing heard that Jingyu and Xiao Chun were about to leave, her eyes widened. She said worriedly, is everything all right? Sister-in-law, don't worry. We're just going to see a few friends. Jingyu smiled at Shin Bailing and said, the journey will be difficult. My husband and I want to ask you two for a favor. We hope you two can agree. Chapter 737. Benefactor, please speak your mind. I, Fong Ying, will help if I can. When Fong Ying heard Jingyu say that she had something to do, she didn't even think before raising her hand to agree. She looked at Jingyu with a determined expression, which made Jingyu laugh involuntarily. It wasn't much of a favor, but she wanted to repay it with her life. We want to leave Xiaobai at Wufu Bay. Please take care of him for us. Jingyu looked at Fong Ying and pursed her lips slightly. When Jingyu finished speaking, Fong Ying and Shin Bailing looked at Jingyu and Xiao Chen in shock. Their eyes were full of confusion. Jingyu had already expected such a reaction from them. She sighed slightly and said, to be honest, we picked up this child on a deserted island. Xiaobai is the name my husband gave him. When we first met him, he was with a monkey. He didn't know what people said and didn't know what people were like. We pitied him, so we took him with us. Now the two of us are going somewhere far away. It is really inconvenient to take such a young child with us. Jingyu pursed her lips slightly and explained. Shin Bailing didn't understand the inconvenience in her words, but Fong Ying understood Jingyu's meaning. If Xiaobai followed Jingyu and Xiao Chun, it was indeed not safe. Thinking of this, Fong Ying frowned slightly. If Xiaobai is willing to stay, we naturally won't refuse and will definitely treat him well. However, have you asked the child? Is he willing to stay? Fong Ying hesitated for a moment before asking, go and talk to the child. Jingyu pursed her lips and replied. Fong Ying nodded slightly and returned to the courtyard with Jingyu. Xiaobai seemed to be tired. He was holding a teacup and drinking water. When he saw Jingyu and Xiao Qin return, he immediately ran over happily. He looked up at Jingyu and Xiao Chun and smiled with curved eyes. Xiaobai. Jingyu squatted down and raised her hand to wipe the sweat from Xiaobai's forehead. Xiao Qin raised his hand and patted Xiaobai's head without saying anything. We are going somewhere far away. Can you stay here and live with Brother Fong and sister-in-law Shin in the future? Jingyu looked at Xiaobai and asked tentatively. When Xiaobai heard Jingyu's words, he was slightly taken aback and looked up at Fong Ying and Shin Bailing. He then turned his head to look at Xiao Chun. Finally, his gaze fell on Jingyu. Suddenly, he threw himself into Jingyu's arms. His small body trembled. When Jingyu didn't react, he began to cry loudly. His cries shocked Jingyu to the core. Wah 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 wah. Don't want me wah wah wah. Xiaobai, who was crying miserably in Jingyu's arms, hugged Jingyu's neck tightly and refused to let go. Fang Ying and Shun Bailing couldn't bear to watch and turned their heads away. I don't want to go. Xiaobai sobbed and hugged Jingyu tightly, refusing to let go. Xiaobai. Jingyu raised her hand to pat Xiaobai's head. At this moment, she suddenly wanted to keep Xiaobai by her side. It was just life and death. What was there to be afraid of? Xiao Chun stood behind Jingyu and placed his hand on her shoulder. Jingyu raised her head slightly to look at Xiao Chun. She felt a little sad, but she let go slightly. Xiaobai's pitch-black eyes were filled with tears as he looked up at Xiao Chen. Xiao Chen squatted down and held Xiaobai's shoulder. He looked at Xiaobai expressionlessly and asked, "Tell me, why did you practice archery?" Xiaobai blinked his watery eyes and looked at Xiao Chun in confusion. He seemed to be thinking very carefully because of Xiao Chen's question. Chapter 738. The arrow in your hand is to protect the people you want to protect. Xiao Chen stared at Xiaobai and said, "You are too weak now. If you come with us now, the only outcome is that we will lose our lives because we want to protect you." Xiao Chun stared at Xiaobai as he spoke. There was no fluctuation in his cold eyes, and his words were calm and firm. Hearing this, Xiaobai's eyes widened slightly, and he stared at Xiao Chen in a daze, suddenly unable to speak. "If you stay, follow Fang Ying to learn martial arts and swordsmanship, and establish your own power in the 5 prefectures Bay. When you grow up and become truly strong, I will come to take you away and fight alongside you. At that time, you will not need our protection." Xiao Chen slowly stood up and stared at Xiaobai with a burning gaze. He asked in a very serious tone, "Then, do you still want to come with us?" This was probably the longest sentence Xiao Chun had ever said in front of Xiaobai. Anyone could understand these words, but did Xiaobai really understand? It must be known that this child had just come into contact with people not long ago. Fang Ying and Shun Bailing frowned slightly, looking at Xiaobai's small body. Xiaobai raised his head and stared at Xiao Chun. Finally, he pursed his lips and said with a frown, Strong, protect? Yes, only when you become strong can you protect the people you want to protect." Xiao Chen looked down at Xiaobai and nodded. Jingyu looked at the 2 figures, one big and one small, and suddenly had a strange feeling. It was as if after today, in the 5 prefectures Bay, there seemed to be a hidden seed that was slowly sprouting at this moment. Xiaobai stared at Xiao Chun for a long time, and suddenly pounced on Xiao Chun. He hugged Xiao Chen's leg and said in a muffled voice, "Come to take me. My surname is Xiao." Xiao Chen's body stiffened. He clenched his fist slightly, raised his hand and pressed it on Xiaobai's head, and said in a deep voice, "Okay." A long time later, Jingyu would still remember that afternoon when the 2 figures, one big and one small, quietly woke up a terrifying expert with a few simple words. It was that hug and that one word. This was the agreement and promise between men. In the end, Xiao Chun and Jingyu left, but Xiaobai stayed behind. For a long time, Jingyu would occasionally think of that cautious child who was like a monkey. That child's name was Xiaobai. In April, there was a lot more rain. After leaving the 5 prefectures Bay, Jingyu and Xiao Chun did not dare to delay on the road. They went all the way to Mei Province. In order to hide their tracks, the 2 of them shuttled back and forth on land. This journey took more than 10 days. Long City was the town closest to the desert. After passing through the desert, they would directly reach the border of Tokyo. After leaving the border of Tokyo, they would truly leave. Why is it so hot here? The weather in April was not supposed to be like this, but from the time they arrived at Long City, it was so hot that Jingyu almost died. She did not know how much water she drank along the way, and because she could not expose her face, she had to wear a veil. At this time, Jingyu and Xiao Chun were riding horses on this wide road under the scorching sun. Xiao Chen's face did not change. He wore a black leather mask on his face, and under the mask, there were a few scars. Chapter 739. Looking at the scar, it seemed to be a burn. It was the same on Jingyu's face. A black birthmark could be seen at the corner of her eyebrows. In other people's eyes, they were wearing masks and veils to hide their ugliness. This saved them a lot of trouble along the way. We're reaching Du City soon. Xiaoqun glanced at Jingyu with a gentle gaze. We're finally reaching after traveling for so long. Jingyu sighed deeply. She narrowed her eyes as she looked at the huge city in the sandstorm. After leaving Du City, they would enter the desert. The desert was filled with sand and black rocks. After passing through the desert, they would reach the border of Tokyo. Outside the border was the Roman forest. The reason why Jingyu chose this path was to avoid the pursuing soldiers. Another reason was that this direction was the least populated. The inspection here would not be so strict. Perhaps in the desert, no one would care too much about what happened in the imperial city. Jingyu and Xiaoqun rode their horses slowly and stopped at the gate of Du City. The first thing they saw was the arrest warrant that had been blown away by the wind. It had Jingyu and Xiaoqun's portraits pasted on it. However, the guards at the gate only casually scanned the passers-by. Jingyu heaved a sigh of relief when she saw this. She had guessed correctly. The inspection in the desert of Du City was not strict. Jingyu and Xiaoqun dismounted and led their horses into the city. As expected, they were stopped by the guards. The guard looked at Jingyu and Xiaoqun and said, "Why are you covering your faces in broad daylight? Quick, 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 take it off." The guard frowned and shouted at Jingyu and Xiaoqun. Jingyu stopped and looked at the guard. She smiled unnaturally and said, "Sir, we have encountered some trouble. Our faces are a little scary. If we don't cover our faces, we're afraid that we'll scare people." Scare people? The guard obviously did not believe her. Jingyu helplessly took off the veil on her face and looked at the guard. The guard was originally calm, but when he saw Jingyu's face, he immediately took a step back. "You're your face?" The guard's eyes widened as he looked at Jingyu's face that was covered. Half of her face was covered with a black birthmark, and there were white bubbles of some unknown substance. It was really disgusting to look at. "Sir, I'm really sorry for scaring you." Jingyu lowered her head guiltily and walked toward the guard with a sincere face. She kept getting closer and said, "I really didn't do it on purpose. Actually, I used to be very beautiful. If you don't believe me, sir, look at me." All right. The guard was forced back by Jingyu and suddenly shouted to stop Jingyu. He took a deep breath and said with a smile, "I think the two of you are in a hurry, right? Quickly go in. Don't delay." "Then what about my veil?" Jingyu raised her hand and asked while holding her veil. Wear it. Wear it." The guard couldn't bear to look at Xiaoqun and turned his head away. He silently looked at Xiaoqun and saw that a small part of his skin was exposed under the mask. It was as if he had been scalded. He sighed silently. No wonder he married such a woman. It turned out that his face was also like that. Chapter 740. Sigh, they are a good match. The guard watched as Jingyu and Xiaoqun entered the city. He sighed deeply and returned to his seat. He squinted at the passers-by and stopped one or two from time to question them. However, he spent most of his time chatting with the people around him. Jingyu and Xiaoqun successfully entered the city. Xiaoqun looked at Jingyu strangely and asked, "When did you do that to your face?" "Guess." Jingyu looked at Xiaoqun proudly and walked forward to find the inn they would be staying at tonight. After this meal, the two of them were penniless. It's fine if they don't have money. Jingyu naturally ordered the 9th emperors to rob people. Therefore, Jingyu and Xiaoqun were now millionaires in the modern world. Jingyu and Xiaoqun found a rather domineering inn and checked in. They took a comfortable bath and laid on the bed. They fell into a deep sleep. The room was much cooler than the outside, and there was even ice to dissipate heat. They slept until the next morning. So sore. Jingyu rubbed her neck and turned over. She pushed Xiao Qin's arm away in disgust. Her neck hurt from rubbing. Xiao Qin opened his eyes and saw Jingyu rubbing her shoulder. He reached out to help Jingyu rub her shoulder and said faintly, "Who told you not to move when you fell asleep? Wasn't it because you insisted on hugging me?" Jingyu glared at Xiao Qin unhappily. She raised her hand and slapped away Xiao Qin's hand. She stretched and said, "I'm so hungry. I want to eat." "Okay." Xiao Qin calmly raised his eyebrows. He got up and washed up. He put on his mask and held Jingyu's hand as they went downstairs. They ordered a table of dishes and ate in the inn. Jingyu ate unhappily. "Why?" "Xiao Qin, I want a mask too." Jingyu lifted her veil with one hand and held food with the other. Every time she ate, she had to gently lift her veil and stuff the food into her mouth. This made Jingyu furious. She glared at Xiao Qin and said with hidden bitterness. Xiao Qin turned to look at Jingyu and silently said, "No." "Why?" Jingyu stared at Xiao Qin and said, "Isn't it the same? Why can't I wear a mask?" "You're fine like this." Xiao Qin calmly put down the cup in his hand and looked at the mess in front of Jingyu's table. He said, "You're already like this with your veil. If you take it off, I think the table won't be happy." "Xiao Qin, you actually despise me." Jingyu lowered her head and looked at her table. Then, she looked at Xiao Qin's table. Her cheeks suddenly became hot. Then, she slammed the table and stood up. She glared at Xiao Qin with a murderous look. The commotion attracted the attention of the people around them. They all looked curiously at Jingyu and Xiao Qin's table. Xiao Qin's face darkened slightly. He stood up and pulled Jingyu to sit down. He calmly continued to eat, ignoring everyone's expressions. "It's not impossible if you want to wear a mask," Xiao Qin said as he silently picked up some food and put it in his mouth. He chewed and said, "Tonight, you'll be on top. Satisfy me." Jingyu spat out the mouthful of soup that she had just drunk onto the table. She looked at Xiao Qin as if she had seen a ghost. Then, her face turned red and white. Her mouth twitched violently. She never thought that Xiao Qin would say something like this so blatantly. It was simply, "You, go away." Jingyu pushed Xiao Qin away with a red face. Chapter 741. Xiao Qin dodged and didn't fall to the ground. He sat down and looked at the table full of food. He didn't have the desire to continue eating. He raised his hand and asked the waiter to remove the dishes and serve some fruits and pastries. He leaned back on the chair and listened to the conversation in the inn. Sacrifice? Jingyu listened for a long time. The most she heard was something about worship and sacrifice. Suddenly, she was confused. She turned to Xiao Qin and asked, "Do you know what sacrifice is?" "I've heard of it." Xiao Qin narrowed his eyes and said, "When I was traveling to other countries, I heard that in the desert there are many believers who worship gods. I thought that I would only see them in the desert. I didn't expect that there would be a sacrifice in Long City. It turns out to be like this." Jingyu suddenly nodded. In modern times, there were such clans. There were people who believed in all kinds of things. Jingyu could understand this quite well. Jingyu and Xiao Qin sat in the inn and listened to the people talking about the sacrifice. They said that there would be a grand sacrifice in Long City tonight. Many people would go and participate. Jingyu was very curious about what the sacrifice in ancient times was like. Anyway, they were going to buy the things they needed to enter the desert. Tonight, they could see what the sacrifice in Long City was like. After Jingyu and Xiao Qin ate and drank to their heart's content, they went out to the streets to buy some things. There were all kinds of things in the city. The two of them walked leisurely in the city. One of them wore a mask while the other covered his face. Almost no one looked at them on the streets. What are we missing? Jingyu frowned and thought. Jingyu and Xiao Qin walked on the street. Both of them carried various things in their hands. They stood on the street and thought about what they were missing. We've bought all the important things. There shouldn't be anything else. Xiao Qin raised his eyebrows calmly. Jingyu pursed her lips slightly and was about to nod in agreement when she suddenly saw a slender figure standing in front of a stall not far away, frowning slightly with a conflicted expression. "Miss, I can't accept this." The man's clothes were as white as snow, and he had a gentle smile on his face. He looked at the short and chubby girl in front of him with a sincere expression and said, "Miss, it's best if you take this back. But I like you." The girl had thick eyebrows and big eyes. Her body was quite sturdy. As the two of them walked back and forth, they attracted the attention of the passers-by on the road. Looking at the man's gentle and elegant appearance, there was a faint smile on his face. However, his eyes were filled with helplessness at the situation in front of him. The manservant standing behind the man furrowed his brows and stared at the scene in front of him with widened eyes. The girl was holding a purse in her hand. She looked at the man and said, "I'm not like you scholars. I don't know much about this purse. It's said that it's the best thing to express love. Don't you feel it? Or do you look down on me?" The girl looked like she wouldn't let go if he didn't explain clearly. The man was helpless. He had already said it so clearly. Why was she still so shameless? "Miss, our young master said that he doesn't like you." The servant stepped forward and said to the girl with the purse, "You've been chasing our young master for 3 to 4 days. Aren't you tired?" Chapter 742. My father taught me before. One must persevere in doing something. The woman was born with a heroic spirit, so her words were also quite heroic. She looked at the two people with a resolute expression as she replied. Jingyu saw this scene from afar and walked closer with some doubts. When she saw the man in white standing proudly, she was stunned. She looked at the smiling tiger. His eyes were clearly filled with impatience, but he still had a smile on his face. In this world, who else could have such skills besides Fang Ziqing? Obviously, the person who was being pestered by the woman was Fang Ziqing. "Xiao-chun, am I seeing things? Isn't that Fang Ziqing?" Jingyu asked as she stared at Xiao-chun in astonishment.
Yes.
Xiao-chun raised his eyebrows slightly and continued to observe the situation in front of him. "Miss, I have urgent matters to attend to. I really can't talk to you properly." Fang Zicheng seemed to have been pushed to the edge by this young lady. The smile on his face stiffened a little, but he still bowed politely to the young lady and was about to leave. "Young master, tell me the truth. Do you already have someone in your heart? Is that why you won't accept me?" The woman took a big step forward and blocked Fang Zicheng's path. Fang Zicheng felt a burst of anger. He really didn't know how there could be such a difficult person. Fang Zicheng took a deep breath and nodded solemnly to the woman. "That's right. I already have someone in my heart. Please don't make things difficult for me." So you already have someone in your heart." When the woman heard Fang Zicheng's words, she was instantly hurt. Tears instantly appeared in her eyes. The speed of this change stunned Jingyu, who was standing at the side. Don't cry." Fang Zicheng was also shocked by the woman's sudden tears. He looked at the woman and said, "I'm sorry. I made things difficult for young master." The girl bowed deeply to Fang Zicheng and said, "Since you already have someone you like, how can I break up a pair of mandarin ducks? I've troubled you for the past few days. Let's meet again if fate wills it." The woman raised her hand to wipe away her tears and bowed slightly to Fang Zicheng. Then, she walked away in a carefree manner. He really left. He left, just like that? Fang Zicheng stood in place with a stunned expression. This person who had chased after him for so long, just because he said that his heart already belonged to someone else? If he had known earlier that it would be so effective, he would have said it right from the start. Why would he have hesitated for so long, causing him to run to Great Desert City to hide from people? Thinking of this, Fang Zicheng didn't know whether to laugh or cry. The crowd also slowly dispersed because of the woman. At this moment, Jingyu walked up slowly and stood beside Fang Zicheng. Seeing that Fang Zicheng was still hesitant as he watched the woman leave, she revealed a faint smile in her eyes and said, "If you can't bear to part with her, then go chase after her." "Nonsense, why would I?" Fang Zicheng replied unhappily. He turned around to refute Jingyu's words. However, when he turned around, he paused. He looked at Jingyu suspiciously and asked curiously, "Miss, have we met before?" "Oh, our young master Fang is so forgetful. How long has it been since we last met? You already don't recognize me? Jingyu curled her lips and looked at Fang Ziqing with displeasure. Fang Ziqing looked deeply at Jingyu and said, "There has been no news, which means that we don't know if she is alive or dead. I can't be sure if Imperial Consort Fu is alive or dead." Jingyu and Xiao Chun fell into silence after Fang Ziqing said this. In the end, Xiao Chun lowered his head and didn't say a word. If I'm not wrong, Ning Xiangyuan must have played a part in the Tokyo sending troops to chase after you. Fang Ziqing narrowed his eyes and said, "The person leading the troops is the second prince, Xiao Jingrand." Chapter 744. How do you know? Jingyu raised her brows slightly and said, "This Ning Shan is just a concubine in the end. How could she control the emperor's will?" Jingyu narrowed her eyes and looked at Fang Ziqing with a scrutinizing gaze. When Fang Ziqing heard Jingyu's words, his lips curved slightly. He pointed at his head and said, "This place told me. It also told me that this Ning Xiangyuan must have used some unspeakable method to capture the emperor's heart." Jingyu's eyes grew cold. She thought about what Nailin Yu had said to her that day on the boat. Then she thought about what Fang Ziqing had just said. Suddenly, she seemed to understand something. If Nailin Yu and Ning Xiangyuan had made a deal, then the contents of their deal, an unspeakable method to capture the emperor's heart, the poison sect. Jingyu's eyes grew cold. She didn't need to think to know what this so-called unspeakable method was. Although Xiao Yi doted on Ning Xiangyuan, Jingyu's impression of Xiao Yi was that he wasn't an incapable ruler who didn't know what was important. On the contrary, Xiao Yi was very shrewd and could be considered a good emperor. But now, he was suddenly attracted to a little girl? This was too abnormal. Xiao Jingran led troops to hunt her down. Then what about the crown prince? What about the crown prince consort? Jingyu frowned slightly as she looked at Fang Ziqing. The crown prince is imprisoned in the eastern palace. The crown prince consort is in prison. Fang Ziqing paused slightly before continuing. General Shangguan's family is also in prison. What did you say? Jingyu stood up with a serious expression. Panic flashed through her eyes and her heart trembled violently. She stared at Fang Ziqing and asked, "What's going on? Why is General Shangguan's family in prison? Isn't Miaoqiu the crown prince consort? Why is she in prison?" The legitimate daughter of the Shangguan family released the evildoer of the rebellious official and was accused of being an accomplice of the rebellious official. A letter came from an unknown place and accused General Shangguan of secretly raising soldiers. All sorts of crimes were pinned on him. General Shangguan's estate was confiscated and General Shangguan was stripped of his position and thrown into prison. Fang Ziqing faintly narrowed his eyes and said, "The crown prince consort sent a fake imperial edict to save the Shangguan family, but she was caught." Yu's eyes were filled with killing intent. How long had it been? A short time. Shangguan Linglan's father and elder brother were imprisoned because of this. Lu Miaoqiu was also imprisoned in the Ministry of Justice's prison. Jingyu knew very well that Lu Miaoqiu was never an impulsive person. If she didn't have a meticulous plan and careful consideration, she would never try to save people. Since she had a plan to save people, she was still caught. It was easy to imagine what kind of situation they were in now. "Jingyu, I came to find you to tell you about the Tokyo's current situation. There's one more thing I need to tell you." Fang Ziqing stared deeply into Jingyu's golden eyes and said, "Don't go back to the Tokyo. Do what you want to do. Linglan once said that her father is my father. My father has already left me. How can I give up on her father?" Jingyu clenched her fists tightly. The intense emotions in her eyes were filled with brutality. Chapter 745. Ning Xiangyuan. "Oh, Ning Xiangyuan, you actually forced me to this extent," Jingyu said through gritted teeth. Jingyu knew what Fang Ziqing was trying to say. The Tokyo Imperial City was practically Ning Xiangyuan's world. Who else but Ning Xiangyuan could send the general's estate and the crown princess to prison? Jingyu, you should know why they did this. If you go back to the Tokyo Imperial City to save them now, you will only make things worse. Fang Ziqing looked at Jingyu and said, you will find out about what happened in the Imperial City sooner or later. What I need to do is to stop you in advance. There is only one way to save them. Go to the Roman forest as soon as possible. The Roman forest doesn't belong to any country or power. Your development there is the best way to save them. Don't make everything they have done meaningless. Fang Ziqing looked at Jingyu and then at Xiao Chun. Xiao Chun raised his hand slightly to hold Jingyu's hand. Jingyu turned to look at Jingyu and then lowered her head. She blinked and her golden eyes returned to their original black color. She lowered her head and asked indifferently, how are they going to treat the general's estate and the crown princess? Don't worry. The crown prince is not a useless person. The corners of Fang Ziqing's mouth curled up slightly as he said, moreover, the 9th royal uncle's power in Dongqing Imperial City is not just a little bit. In the short term, the general's manor and the crown princess will not be in any danger, but I'm afraid that physical pain is unavoidable. Jingyu leaned against the back of the chair and looked outside without speaking. Xiao Chun turned to look at Fang Ziqing and asked, how did you come to Du City? Haha, 9th emperors, with this young master's intelligence, it is very simple for me to come to Du City. When Fang Ziqing heard Xiao Chen's question, he raised his chin proudly and said, based on my understanding of you, through elimination and speculation, this is the only path that makes sense. From Yangzhou to Wufu Bay, and then to Shangling City in Mei Province, this is an excellent route. Perhaps the 9 emperors wouldn't choose this route, but Jingyu would definitely choose this route. Am I right? Fang Ziqing smiled as he looked at Jingyu and Xiao Chun. It seems that your brain is still useful. Jingyu raised her eyebrows in surprise when she heard Fang Ziqing accurately point out their route. Ha ha ha. Such a simple matter. There's no need to test this young master. Fang Ziqing proudly raised his hand to pick up the teacup and said, Xiao Jingran was so sure that you would take the road in Lin and province. How ridiculous. Oh, why is it ridiculous? Jingyu looked at Fang Ziqing with interest and asked. If the 9th emperors were to travel alone, then Xiao Jingran would definitely have guessed correctly. If the 9th emperors were to choose to go to the Roman forest, he would first choose this quick and easy road that goes straight into the Roman forest without any turns. Isn't that right, 9th emperors? Fang Ziqing tilted his head and looked at Xiao Chun. Yes. Xiao Chun replied indifferently, Lin and province has the most power in the pugilistic world. If I were to travel alone, I would be unimpeded. That's right. The target of this pursuit is not the 9th emperors, but the empress with different pupils. Fang Ziqing smiled and said, since we want to catch Jingyu, and Jingyu is with Xiao Chun, is there a need to think? We must be thinking according to Jingyu's train of thought, and the route we chose is also according to Jingyu's route. Chapter 746. Jingyu's mouth twitched as she looked at Fang Ziqing. What he meant was that Xiao Chun listened to her. Come, 9th emperors, let me interview you. Jingyu put on an act as she looked at Xiao Chan and said, how do you feel about being ridiculed by someone for listening to a woman? I'm happy to. When Xiao Chun heard Jingyu's words, he calmly raised his eyebrows and coolly said those 3 words. Jingyu was stunned. Fang Ziqing laughed loudly and looked at Xiao Chun with interest. In this world, only you, Jingyu, have the ability to command the 9th emperors. You, on the other hand, Xiao Chun coldly turned his head and looked at Fang Ziqing. I've said what I wanted to say. What are you still sitting here for? Fang Ziqing's face stiffened. He gritted his teeth and glared at Xiao Chun. I've only been sitting here for a while. I haven't even had a sip of water after talking so much. Oh, then drink. Xiao Chun put his hand on Jingyu's shoulder and said, drink it and get lost. Fang Ziqing's face suddenly darkened. He looked at Xiao Chun as if he wanted to swallow him alive. He said with a sad face, I came all the way here to find you, and this is how you treat me? This is too much, too much. You can write a letter. I didn't ask you to come, Xiao Chun calmly retorted. Fang Zicheng's belly full of complaints had no place to vent. I don't care. I'm not leaving. Fang Zicheng leaned back and tilted his head. Then I'm not going back to the imperial city. The world is so chaotic now. Do you have the heart to let me run around alone in this chaotic world? After all, I'm still your friend, right? Jingyu looked at Fang Zicheng with a dark face. This was the first time she had seen someone so shamelessly refuse to leave. Don't worry, I won't disturb you. Fang Zicheng's words were definitely directed at Xiao Qian. He looked as if he understood everything, which made Jingyu's face turn even darker. Fang Zicheng shamelessly stayed behind with a servant named Xiao Ku. He was a clever young man. Jingyu originally thought that this servant was one of Fang Zicheng's lackeys. However, Xiao Qian said, how do you think Fang Zicheng survived all the way to Du City? As soon as this question was asked, Jingyu immediately understood. This manservant was no ordinary person. As the night deepened, bonfires were lit in Du City. Du City was considered lively during the day, but it was a different scene at night. Jingyu and Xiao Chun had just changed their clothes. As soon as they stepped out of the inn, they saw many people wearing strange clothes on the street. Do you see? Those people wearing long robes are believers of the God Worship sect. Every time it's this time, they will change into the God Worship sect's clothes and go to the altar to offer sacrifices to the god. Fang Zicheng was wearing a light blue robe with Xiao Ku behind him. He stood beside Jingyu and Xiao Chun as he spoke. What god do they worship? Jingyu asked curiously. Their god. Fang Zicheng raised his head slightly. Jingyu followed Fang Zicheng's gaze and saw the flames soaring into the sky. The raging flames seemed to be carrying out a very solemn ceremony. Jingyu frowned slightly and followed Fang Zicheng and Xiao Chun to the altar. Many people wearing strange clothes were holding all kinds of feathers and bells. They were jumping and shouting on the altar. A group of people were kneeling below and chanting something she couldn't understand. Chapter 747. There were many people standing outside the altar. Some were chatting, some were looking at the altar in front of them without speaking, and some were bowing their heads and chanting silently as if they were praying for blessings. Jingyu and Xiao Qian stood at the outermost edge and watched the strange actions of those people. Seeing the person standing in front of the altar and reading out the words, Jingyu sighed slightly. She tugged at Xiao Qian's sleeve and turned to walk out. The altar attracted many people. After walking out of this lively place, Jingyu and Xiao Chun walked together to a high ground. The wind at night was slightly chilly, but it was so hot during the day. Jingyu looked up at the bright moon and felt a little melancholy. She raised her hand and touched her neck. There was a small bottle hanging there, and it contained her father's ashes. Xiao Chun. Jingyu clenched the jade bottle in her hand and said, "No one from the Shangguan family can be missing." Jingyu looked at Xiao Chun with a burning gaze. The firmness and seriousness in her words made Xiao Chun's heart tremble slightly. He raised his hand to hold Jingyu's shoulder and said, "Okay." Jingyu stood on the high ground and looked into the distance. She had never thought that she would be in such a sorry state here, but all along, her only thought was to charge forward. That kind of lively feeling, whether it was love, kinship, moving, or hatred, they were all so lively. Jingyu clearly knew what she had to do. Under the full moon, Jingyu's pitch-black eyes flickered with a faint green light. The feeling in her heart was very different. On the other side of the high ground, the sound of singing and dancing could be heard. Jingyu looked sideways and saw many people dancing around a bonfire, laughing and playing. The noise on the other side was very different from the tranquility on this side, but it also seemed very intimate. Night always passed very quickly. The next morning, Jingyu and the others left Long City and walked towards the desert. The desert didn't seem like a desert. There were caravans passing by everywhere, and there were also sand snakes and lizards. Jingyu rode on a horse with a veil on her face. She looked at the scenery around her and felt the scorching sun. She narrowed her eyes slightly. Fortunately, their group didn't have anything. Even if they encountered bandits in the desert, they probably wouldn't be robbed. Ah, it's so hot. Jingyu complained countless times under the scorching sun. Drink some water. Xiaochun said the same 3 words countless times. Do you want to rest? Fang Ziqing asked countless times. Looking at his eager eyes, Jingyu also looked at Xiaochun expectantly. No. Xiaochun didn't even look at Fang Ziqing. He said calmly, if we don't hurry, we will have to sleep in the desert tonight. You have to know that at night, there are always packs of wolves and bandits in the desert. Sigh. Fang Ziqing sighed faintly and followed with resignation. Based on our speed, we should be able to reach the nearest post house by nightfall, Xiaochun said calmly as he rode on the horse with one hand and looked at the map with the other. If we can save some trouble, then let's save it. Jingyu sighed silently. She urged her horse to follow behind Xiaochun and continued forward. After walking for a short distance, they suddenly saw a person lying in the middle of the road. Chapter 748. This is Jingyu and the rest reined in their horses and walked towards the person lying on the ground. The person lying on the ground was a man. It was hard to tell his age. He looked like he was in his 20s or 30s. His face was pale and his lips were chapped. He looked like a person on the verge of death due to lack of water. Fang Ziqing opened his water sack and fed the man some water. The man slowly woke up and gulped down the water in large mouthfuls. Only then did he look at Jingyu and Xiaochun. Many thanks, sir, for saving my life. Jingyu burst into tears the moment the man opened his mouth. This man actually stuttered. No need. Fang Ziqing slowly stood up and looked at the short man. He asked, why did you faint here? I'm so angry when I talk about it. The man's face was filled with grief and indignation as he said, I was with someone, scouted for treasures. In the end, that person snatched my things and ran away. That's why I fainted because there was no water. Jingyu almost went crazy when she heard this. This feeling of speaking was simply torture to death for someone with OCD. I see. Fang Ziqing nodded and said, I'm afraid this journey is not safe. If you don't mind, why don't you come with us? I think you will be rescued when we reach the relay station in front. Really? Many thanks, sir. The man heard Fang Ziqing's words and immediately thanked him excitedly. Just like that, this person followed Jingyu on their journey. Along the way, Fang Ziqing patiently chatted with this person. From their conversation, Fang Ziqing learned that this person's name was Ma Jin. His ancestors had been searching for treasures in the desert for generations. This time, because he heard that there were treasures, he followed a group of people. He didn't expect that halfway through, those bastards would steal all his things and run away. This caused him to walk in the desert for 3 days and 3 nights without meeting a single living person. He was almost eaten by a wolf. If they hadn't met Jingyu's group today, they wouldn't have been able to find a single bone after the night had passed. SSS, sir. W, where are you going? SS, sir. W, where are you going? Ma Jin asked as he looked sideways at Fang Ziqing. For the sake of convenience, Jingyu gave her horse to Ma Jin so that she could ride with Xiao Qian. It was obvious that the 9th emperors were in a particularly good mood during this journey. Xiaochun, where did you put your hand? Jingyu said through gritted teeth. Xiaochun silently retracted his hand from Jingyu's waist and said calmly, It wasn't me. It's not your head. Jingyu raised her hand and twisted Xiaoqin's waist. Xiaoqin's body stiffened, but he gritted his teeth and endured it. Because of this delay, when the sky was completely dark, they finally saw the relay station lit with red lanterns. Most of the people in the relay station were merchants who were resting or travelers. Fortunately, this day wasn't considered a hot day, so there were relatively few travelers. When Jingyu and Xiaoqin's group arrived, there were rooms for them to rest in. In the main hall of the relay station, Jingyu's group changed their clothes before coming down to eat. There was a lot of noise around them. There were many people drinking, eating, and talking. Ma Jin seemed to be really hungry. He was eating so much that he didn't have the energy to talk. Chapter 749. Jingyu and Xiao Chun were eating when they heard someone talking at the table next to them. What did you say? Something happened at Eagle Mountain again? Someone sitting at the table next to Jingyu spoke, and Jingyu and Xiao Chun looked over. They turned slightly and saw that there were 3 or 4 people at the table, talking with wine glasses in their hands. That's right. I heard another caravan is gone. Another man said, this is already the 5th caravan. If this continues, no one will dare to take that route anymore. What the hell is going on? Another person seemed to be very puzzled about this matter and asked doubtfully, what else can it be? Didn't you see the corpses they dragged back? They were all eaten by wild beasts. They must have encountered a pack of wolves. The man who spoke first said firmly, they offended the wolf god. This is their retribution. They deserved it. Jingyu was confused. She looked at Xiao Chan and Fang Ziqing in confusion. The two of them were also confused. My lord, where are you going? Ma Jin looked at Fang Ziqing, Jingyu, and the others with a puzzled look on his face when he heard the conversation. We are going to cross the desert and head towards the Tokyo border. Fang Ziqing looked at Ma Jin and said, if I remember correctly, we have to pass through Eagle Mountain to get to the border, right? Aya. Ma Jin heard Fang Ziqing's words and said excitedly, that, we can't go there. What's wrong? I heard from the people over there that wolves often appear at Eagle Mountain. Fang Ziqing frowned and asked Ma Jin. Jingyu and Xiao Qin looked at Ma Jin and waited for his answer. That place can't be crossed. Ma Jin said with a solemn expression, just 3 months ago, something big happened in the Eagle Mountain. Jingyu gritted her teeth. Ma Jin's words were too painful to listen to. Stop talking. Jingyu really couldn't stand it anymore. She solemnly raised her hand to interrupt Ma Jin's words. She took a deep breath, raised her hand to pick up the wine jar, and walked to the table next to her. She put down the wine jar in her hand and took out a silver ingot from her waist and threw it on the table. Fellow heroes, my friends have just arrived, and we would like to inquire about something. What strange things have happened in Eagle Mountain? If anyone can tell us everything, this jar of wine and silver ingot will be his. Jingyu's words attracted the attention of everyone in the relay station. However, if anyone dares to spout nonsense and try to fool me with useless nonsense, then... When Jingyu said this, she casually threw away the bowl in her hand. The chopsticks in Xiao Qin's hand instantly flew straight into the middle of the bowl. Under everyone's astonished gaze, the chopsticks directly penetrated the bottom of the bowl and fixed on the wall. The strange thing was that this porcelain bowl was penetrated by the chopsticks, and it was firmly fixed on the wall. There was no trace of a crack. Many of the people sitting here were people of the Jianghu. It was not a big skill to penetrate a bowl with chopsticks, but after penetrating it, the bowl did not crack. How powerful must you be to be able to do that? Looking at the bowl and chopsticks that were fixed to the wall, the precise technique and profound inner strength, the people in the relay station who originally had evil intentions because of Jingyu's words instantly became obedient. Originally, when they saw Jingyu's generosity, they thought that a lamb waiting to be slaughtered had arrived. Chapter 750. Who would have thought that it was actually a sleeping lion? Xiao Chun calmly raised the wine bowl in his hand and took a sip, completely ignoring the fearful gazes directed at him. Jingyu glanced sideways at Xiao Chun, her eyes full of smiles. She had not discussed anything with Xiao Chun, but Xiao Chun had been able to accurately predict what she wanted to do and cooperate with her with such tacit understanding. Threats and rewards coexisted, shocking and convincing everyone present. Haha, little brother, you have good skills. A fierce-looking man stood up first and looked at Xiao Chun with admiration. Seeing that Xiao Chun did not react, he did not get angry. He only scratched his head awkwardly and said, if this lady wants to know what happened on Eagle Mountain, I can tell you. I am Jia Ming. The burly man cupped his hands towards Jingyu in a heroic manner. The moment the man's name was announced, the rest of the people in the relay station gasped. They looked at Jia Ming in horror and exclaimed, "Could you be the Jia Ming who escaped death from the Emo clan's caravan?" "That's right," Jia Ming replied in a low voice. 3 months ago, the Emo family's caravan passed by Eagle Mountain Road. A total of 123 merchants were killed by wolves. I, Jia Ming, was the only one who managed to escape with my life. Jia Ming's voice was steady and powerful. As soon as he finished speaking, everyone in the relay station looked at Jia Ming in a different light. At this moment, Jia Ming lifted up his shirt and revealed the wounds all over his body. The wounds were all left behind by the wolf's claws and teeth. Immediately, everyone's faces revealed looks of admiration. More than 80 of my brothers died at the hands of wolves. If there is anyone who knows about Eagle Mountain, I will say that I know everything. Is there anyone else who dares to say that he knows more than me? Jia Ming's dark eyes scanned the surroundings as he spoke. When everyone received Jia Ming's gaze, they all lowered their heads and turned around. No one dared to speak. Big brother, are you willing to tell us what happened at Eagle Mountain? Jingyu looked at Jia Ming with a slight smile. She tilted her head and asked, "Haha, with good wine as a gift, there is no harm in telling." Jia Ming laughed loudly and walked towards Jingyu's table. Under everyone's gaze, he slowly sat down. After everyone was seated, Jingyu politely poured a large bowl of wine for Jia Ming. "Big brother, you are a brave man to be able to escape from the wolves. Let me toast to you." Hearing Jingyu's words, Jia Ming laughed heartily. He drank the wine poured by Jingyu without hesitation and accepted Jingyu's praise. "My life was exchanged for the lives of my brothers." Jia Ming put down the bowl in his hand heavily and said in a low voice, "My berserker group had 80 brothers, but I was the only one left alive that night. If my brothers hadn't risked their lives to hold back the wolves, I wouldn't have been able to survive." Jia Ming's voice was filled with pain. In a trance, he seemed to have returned to that night. His 80 brothers were cheering excitedly as they set off on their journey. This was the first mission of the new year. At that time, the youngest of his brothers was only 15 years old. It was the first time he had followed them on their journey to protect merchants. He chattered nonstop along the way, thinking that after completing this mission, he would be able to get his first share of money. Among them, there was a man who had just gotten married. He kept talking about his wife at home, causing his brothers to laugh at him. Chapter 751. There were also those men who had just become fathers. They often wondered if their children would look like their mothers or fathers when they grew up. Those who were still boys were envious. They kept saying that they would confess their love to the girl of their dreams after this trip was over. Everything seemed so perfect, but it all ended in Eagle Mountain. Jia Ming, run, run. Jia Ming saw with his own eyes that his brother was screaming crazily. Using his flesh and blood, he threw himself at the wolf and hugged the wolf's head tightly, allowing the wolf's sharp claws to pierce his stomach. "Run, live, avenge us." Jia Ming saw his brothers being torn apart by the wolves with bloodshot eyes. His ears were filled with angry roars. Everyone seemed to have placed their hopes of survival on him at that moment. His life was exchanged for the lives of more than 80 brothers. He carried the blood feud of more than 80 brothers on his back. Do you really think that the wolves of Eagle Mountain just appeared there by accident? Jia Ming took a big gulp of strong alcohol. His eyes were slightly moist and his voice was heavy. He looked at Jingyu and Xiao Chun as he asked slowly, "What do you mean?" Jingyu's heart trembled when she heard this. She looked at Jia Ming with uncertainty. 5 caravans that passed by Eagle Mountain were all eaten by wolves. Jia Ming pursed his lips and said, "These 5 caravans belong to the Emo family. The Emo family is the most powerful family in the desert. Their shops are all over the northwest Great Desert. They are a giant. The Berserker Group's job is to protect these caravans and escort them to their destination. It's not like we didn't encounter wolves in the desert." Jia Ming seemed to have adjusted his emotions. He pursed his lips and said, But the wolves we encountered that night were different from the ones we encountered before. Those wolves were organized and disciplined. They even bit people on sight like crazy. You definitely don't know what the last thing I saw when I was running away was. Jia Ming took a deep breath and looked gravely at Jingyu and Xiao Chun. He said, I saw a person sitting on a wolf. Jingyu and Xiao Chen's eyes widened in fear when they heard this. What? I knew you would react this way. How is it? Do you feel very fearful? I was just like you. Jia Ming looked at Jingyu and Xiao Chen's expressions and smiled proudly. Fortunately, he wasn't the only one. Jingyu was terrified, but her fear and Jia Ming's fear were two completely different things. What terrified Jingyu was that from Jia Ming's words, there was actually someone who could command the wolves. What was going on? I was scared out of my wits. I thought I was seeing things, but I wasn't. Jia Ming took a deep breath and said, when I was running away, I heard melodious music coming from the wolves.